Hi everybody, welcome to When Tomorrow Comes. I'm back after my absence last week, where I understand a younger, better, more talented person took my place. So I've obviously made sure she didn't get to come back. Joined this week by my usual colleagues, Dan and Ashley. Hello guys, how are you?
Hi,
I'm very well, thanks Ian.
We've got Clive Burbridge making another appearance. Hello Clive, nice to have you back.
Nice to see you.
And we have a special guest in Jamie Lloyd from Sustrans. Hello, Jamie.
Hello there.
So you have the dubious honour of also being Dan's best man and vice versa. So I'm hoping there'll be time for you to tell us a few stories about Dan. We'll come into that in due course. But in tried and tested fashion, I'll just start with allowing the author of our Wednesday article to provide a quick overview of the points that's been raised. And Clive, that was you again. You're on a bit of a roll, chap. This is what, your third article in the last couple of months? Do you want to just tell us what you were talking about today?
Yes, the recent article was about e-scooters, and obviously the government have now issued trials for those to commence for the next year in order to hopefully allow the legislation to be in place to legalise them. And the article basically just picked up on that, and also I felt it was perhaps a missed opportunity because it's only private hire firms. You'd require a driving licence and insurance, and as a result of which it's almost akin to a moped and a motorbike trial rather than what I would have thought it should be akin to, which is an e-bike or cycling. And the restricted age limit because of the licensing means an under 16-year-old that wants to use one for school couldn't use it as part of the trial. So that in a nutshell was what it was all about.
Okay, Jamie, good or a bad thing, this trial?
Well, I think the trial's a good thing. They've obviously been completely unregulated so far, and we've all seen them everywhere, and it's impossible to police that. I do regret the idea that you have to have a driving licence. I think that's a driver to force people to learn to drive when they might not be wanting to. They might be wanting to choose more sustainable forms of transport. Certainly from an active travel perspective, of course, e-scooters don't fill any kind of remit. You're not getting that double-edged benefit of getting to work safely and sustainably, but also benefiting your health, which of course is the great benefit of cycling and walking. So having said that, I do see how they can fit into our transport mix in a very comfortable way, in that people that don't have the space to store bikes, that's very much the case here in Brighton. A lot of people live upstairs in flats. If you leave a bike out on the street, it degrades very quickly in the sea air. So I can see a scheme like this actually being really beneficial for people that want to whiz across town, but won't ride a bike for whatever reason. I'd like to see a few of the constraints removed, but I like the idea that they have to be in docking stations. We know that a lot of bike schemes work when they're docking station related, when they're not just ones you pick up and leave around. That leads to clutter and resentment from the general public. So I think a dock station solution is the right solution, and we can probably then guarantee that they're charged from eco-friendly electricity sources.
Right, okay. So Ashley, Jamie sort of highlighted the benefits of, I suppose, what would then be a hire service as opposed to a bring your own purchase service. What do you feel about that? Is that inclusive? Is that fair? Is that just a great commercial deal for hire companies that can strike a deal with local authorities? What's your take on it?
I think we've got to start somewhere with it. Now, I've used some of these hire facilities in other countries, and I'm not going to lie, it was a lot of fun. They're great fun, and you can whiz about all over the place. You get places quicker. You don't have to jump in an Uber. You don't have to get in, other cars. You don't need to get a lift somewhere. So my feeling is that it is a good starting point, and I think that another benefit of it, whilst I agree with Jamie that it hasn't got some of those active travel benefits as sort of cycling a regular manual bike or a manual scooter would have, it does potentially get people out of the car, which we know does take up so much room on our streets. That's the problem. When you see those classic visualizations of cars and how much room, having one person in one car takes up in the middle of the city versus having one person on one e-scooter, I think that's going to be a huge benefit. And as Jamie said, we know that, other schemes such as Boris bikes and things, we know that having those docking stations work. We know that it's something we can implement as part of new developments. You can have those new sort of e-scooter racks, that are plugged up to the sustainable electricity, and we can use that way. I guess whether it's inclusive or not will come down to how it's actually implemented, what the costs are going to be, how expensive it will be to run and implement, and yeah, you know, maybe having to have a provisional license isn't ideal in the sense that it restricts certain proportions of the population. But maybe that's something that they'll change in the long run when they can assure that they are safe and able for everyone of all ages to use. Yes. I mean, I'm someone who's had a provisional license for my whole life and never learned to drive. So, you know, it doesn't mean that you need to eventually take that step and learning to drive either. So it's easy to get one, I would say.
Dan, I mean, I agree with Ashley's point about their fun. I mean, having been, just thinking back the last couple of years, being in Barcelona and being in Tel Aviv, both of which at the time were hot places to be. There's also a real attraction of being on a scooter as opposed to turning up sort of sweating buckets from cycling somewhere. But I guess the thing is about transport is we're all incredibly selfish, aren't we? When we're drivers, we're thinking about what's best for us as drivers. When we're cyclists, we kind of think what's best for us as cyclists. There are some obvious challenges with scooters. I mean, again, being in Tel Aviv, I nearly got swept off my feet a few times when people went flying past at 30 kilometers per hour. Have we got the road and pavement infrastructure to introduce another vehicle onto what are already in some places busy spaces?
It's a bit of a conundrum, isn't it? Because they're obviously too fast for the pavement.
Especially if you're like Clive and you've had one souped up without the authorities' knowledge. But I didn't mention that. Sorry, Daniel.
And they can get really, really quick, as you say. You know, some of them look really nippy. So you obviously don't want them on the pavement. They seem a bit vulnerable for the road. So, you know, there is this kind of question, and I can see that's where the government's grappling with this trial. In where do they go? Do we have existing infrastructure? Because the bike lane, when the bike lane exists, would seem like a happy sort of place if they go about the same speed as a push bike. You know, fairly moderate pace, not too quick. That would seem like a sort of happy marriage, if you like. But what about places where you've got no infrastructure, where you've got roads or pavement? So if they're going to go on the roads, then I'd appreciate that people do need to have a certain sense of awareness of how traffic systems work. That's why, you know, people advise that when you get on your bike, you do a bit of a cycling proficiency test to work out the rules of the road. And I think that's where the government's coming from with this kind of requirement for people to have at least a provisional license, so they just have a basic understanding of the rules of the road. Because otherwise, the government could be accused of playing fast and loose with people's safety. So
Jamie, is it? Sorry, Dan. I was going to say, Jamie, is it about educating the scooter riders, or is it about educating the walking population? Because as someone that cycled down to Brighton a few weeks back and enjoyed riding along the seafront, which is, you know, there's some very good cycling routes that run along the front next to the roads, but separate from the road, and effectively they're next to the pavement. Yes, it was a busy day. There was a lot of people about, but there was still that sense that people treat the cycle ways as an option as opposed to compulsory. The amount of people that sort of drifted in and out, you know, almost without realising how. I mean, it's just an accident waiting to happen, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, and the answer to almost everything in active and sustainable travel is that we need proper segregated cycle lanes, and those cycle lanes should be built with a wheelchair user in mind or a mobility bike user in mind first. Then it will be wide enough and capable enough for everyone else in the sustainable transport mix to use it. Though the mileage of such cycle lanes in this country is criminally small, as we all know. The Benelux countries, the Netherlands, have shown us how it should be done, as have the Scandinavian countries, and we're now rapidly going to have to catch up with them. We've got this huge tranche of money from the government and the Active Travel Fund, which is quite extraordinary, and we really have potential to deliver proper segregated cycle routes. These things can't go on the pavements. They go much faster than an e-bike. E-bikes cut out at 15 miles an hour. And I've seen these things go much faster. They need to be in cycle lanes, but those cycle lanes need to be fit for purpose, which unfortunately the vast majority are not in the UK.
Clive, if we're going to have hire schemes. So we're going to give different operators essentially a monopoly on the use of these facilities in different cities, and presumably we could see different operators in different cities. Shouldn't it be those companies that fund these infrastructure improvements as opposed to the public sector?
That's an interesting argument, but I don't think we'll ever get anywhere on that. They do certainly do a training scheme, all of them, in fairness, so they will argue they do their bit. They supply the insurance. They also, many of them give away free helmets and the rest, so they put a strong argument forward that they're doing their bit. But as for infrastructure, no, I mean, it'll be a lovely to have, but I can't ever see it happening, other than the docking stations and the rest. The government have very much put the pressure in their guidance when they released it on local authorities to look to use the cycle lanes and to look to use existing infrastructure and change the regulations as appropriate and necessary. So haven't we got
to be a bit more radical, Ashley, than just saying, well, it's too difficult?
I think Clive is right. It's so challenging to say that we need to. I know we need to get this infrastructure implemented, but we've known, for many years, like Jamie said, that having these segregated cycle lanes is the best way forward. But there's so many challenges to achieving that. I'm not sure what the solution is going to be, and it could be that the e-scooter usage rises so much that creates the demand that we just have to have the infrastructure, and then it comes, eventually, same as we have seen improvements in cycle infrastructure, throughout other parts of the UK, including London as well. But it's probably not going to be a quick fix. It's probably going to be something that is, time will tell, and then infrastructure will come along, which is not the right way, but is the way it typically happens.
So Dan, you're a newly appointed director of Iceni Futures. Give me something a bit more visionary.
Well, it's part of the flexibility of modern street infrastructure. When we're designing our streets, we basically need to be creating streets that are wide enough to accommodate all sorts of different modes of transport. We know we're going to have delivery drivers, vehicles of some description will still form part of our lives because people need transportation. This mobility is a service idea, whilst it might not be a private car, will still form part of our lives. We need to consider public transport. We need to consider bicycles, pedestrians, now e-scooters. The key to it is having a street that's wide enough to accommodate all of these things, but actually be flexible. So you might have a median strip that can be a garden one minute and a tramway the next. So you're basically using the width of the streets, that kind of public realm, to create different uses and be flexible enough to deliver different solutions depending on how technology evolves and changes. So you don't want to be knocking buildings down to create new, wider streets. You want to have that width there, that public realm, to create nice, bright, open boulevards that you have in many continental European cities, that allows you to have cycles in their own dedicated infrastructure, e-scooters, whatever it is, then public transport and a mix, and also green infrastructure as well.
Jamie, we've obviously asked you to come and talk specifically about scooters, or e-scooters, I should say. Are we right to put our focus on e-scooters, or would you say, public space is a finite area and we need to be focusing on greater priorities? What would you like to?
I'd like to echo what Dan was saying. I'd like to echo what Dan was saying there. It's about reclaiming road space from traffic. That does not mean banning cars. Cars need to be guests in our neighbourhoods. And of course, we know that a lot of them are very necessary. Emergency vehicles, trades which really do need a van. But and that's the way it works in cities like Amsterdam, where you have broadly pedestrianised streets with very good cycling infrastructure, where a car can still access if necessary, but on a very low scale. Now, that works. That means you've got all the space in the world. Cars take over a third of the urban space. And that's a monopolisation that has to end if we're going to fit in all of the active and sustainable travel infrastructure that we want, so that we need if we're going to avert climate disaster. I think it's absolutely imperative that this discussion is about removing the dominance of traffic, especially from urban areas, and reclaiming that space for people that need it.
Brilliant. Clive, you get the honour, as per usual, as the author of the article, of having the last word. What would you like to leave us with?
Well, I would reciprocate what Jamie has said. And,
was Jamie stolen your thunder?
Yeah, it is about usable space that can be adapted and changed over time. And I do think we do need to embrace the e-scooter. It's the next thing along the lines of the latest technology that's moving us away from the car. And from my point of view, the more options we have available for the public, and the more the public can use modes other than the car, it's a good thing.
So final question, Clive, just very briefly, is there space in your super duper bike lockup for an e-scooter?
There's already one there waiting for it to be legal, waiting to ride it.
I don't know why I even bothered asking. All right, look, thanks very much for that. Jamie, especially, thanks for joining us. Everybody else, thanks for your contributions as per usual. For those that have tuned in to watch us, thanks as ever. See you next time.